This is the Sunday stream opening song because the other song is copyrighted. La 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 la. Oh look, here comes Dog Cat Fox.
Hi, Sky.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Sunday stream. The stream I do on Sundays because Sunday is the day to stream on Sundays. Hope you're all doing well this beautiful Sunday morning. Chilly Sunday morning where I am, but hey, I'll take that over a heat wave. Hope you're all doing well. Before I get into today's selection, who's joining me on this beautiful, I'll just keep saying beautiful Sunday morning. Funtime Bats, Matt Barnes. I just put in my, I'm 2 steps away from being done with my Invisalign thing. And I just put in the new set in this morning, so my teeth feel a little out of sorts. So if I fumble a word here or there, that's why. So Matt Barnes, hello. The Useless Cook, hello. Simon Willikins, hello. Noah Asensio, hello. Mike R, hello. Mike Savage, blarg. Who else is here? Keeverdam, Septus Wolf, and Arc210. And everybody's popping in now. Beachy Cogito, Shadowclaw. Good morning to you all. Also, as a note for reference, in the GoFundMes, I have spoken to Shady Grin, and he and I have agreed. I think Shady Grin is a he. It's so odd these days because, like, I only know them by their name. So I'm going to assume Shady Grin is a he. If I'm incorrect, I use the incorrect pronoun. I apologize. Anyway, Shady Grin has alerted me that the GoFundMe associated with Shady Grin is safe to take off of the list. So that's why it's not there anymore. And so if you'll direct your attention to the top of the chat box to the GoFundMes for our friends Angry Illinoisian and his kitten. If you happen to have a couple of bucks to spare, their friends and families could certainly use your help. So thank you so much for that. Just as a programming note, because it's become practically tradition to name off those 3 GoFundMes. Jack Frost, good morning. So today we have a panel. Oh boy, a panel, but it's a roundtable discussion. A roundtable discussion, I assume, of diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging experts. Ah, yes, belonging. I've talked about this previously. The evolution of the diversity, etc. initiative from when I began doing YouTube till now. In the beginning, it was D ampersand I. D and I. And of course, this is the beginning of my exposure to it. It might have been just diversity prior. But anyway, it was D and I, diversity and inclusion. And that was great. And then somebody said, hey, wait a second. But what about equity? What about everybody getting the same result regardless of their merit? Well, okay, we'll call it DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion. And then someone said, no, wait, that's not good enough. What about justice? And they're like, oh, yeah, obviously. Can you see a pattern forming here? Can you think of another situation where additional letters just keep being added on to something to continually try to make it sound like it's more better? It's more virtuous than it was yesterday. Can you imagine such a thing? Anyway, so they said justice. So it was JEDI. Ah, we can be Jedis. And then Scientific American did an article that said, hey guys, Jedi is kind of associated with a corporate entity and a whole like subculture, and it's maybe you don't want to be associated with that. And people started to, oh yeah, why didn't we think of that? And they kind of started edging away from using Jedi. You still see it here and there, but not so much anymore. And then somebody had the brilliant idea of saying, wait, diversity, equity, inclusion, but what about belonging? What about feeling like you actually belong there? You're not having imposter syndrome because you've been selected for a job or a position based entirely on your aesthetics. No. What about belonging? Make sure you feel like you're legitimately there. Oh, okay, well, we'll put belonging in there. But yet, to this date, I have yet to see anybody create the acronym DEBI, DEBI, for diversity, equity, belonging, and inclusion. I haven't seen it done yet, so I'm promoting it. I say DEBI her day is coming. Her day is coming. And I don't know if they'll say it in this one, but they added belonging to the title of their presentation. So I'm excited to find out if finally Debbie will make an appearance. But if not, I'm glad to be the vanguard of that effort. You like that? Like that? Okay, that's my introduction. Anyway, so we have 4 diversity and inclusion experts, consultants, something, discussing their trade around a coffee table. This is from a program or a channel. No, sorry, it's a program called Unfiltered, but the channel is like, it's a company called Kingcore Consulting. There's some implications there, I don't know. But anyway, so I think the CEO is part of this discussion. Can I zoom in on this a little bit? Yes, I can. Okay, let me just make sure it's full. Okay, so here's a couple of programming notes on this one. I took out the music at the very beginning and at the very end because I don't know if that's copyrighted, but then the people start introducing themselves over the music right at the beginning. So it'll be silent for a second and then it'll cut in. And at the very end, it'll just suddenly cut out. Otherwise, yeah, let's find out what a quartet of diversity consultants have to say about the subject. There's a lot of things going on in the world right now that I kind of also want to talk about, but I'm not nearly as well versed in them as I should be. Specifically for future reference, the whole FTX scandal, that thing fascinates me. And so if you guys in the future don't know what I'm talking about, because, dime a dozen, some shady billionaire suddenly collapses, happens a lot. It confuses me that it keeps happening a lot, but, suckers born every minute. Anyway, I might do a different stream on that, hopefully maybe with somebody who knows more about what it's all about. All right, that aside, let's get into it. Unfiltered, diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. I'm here to be educated. Let's go.
My name's Kevin Kinker. I'm the CEO of Kinker Consulting.
Kingcore Consulting. Okay, you're the CEO, and I believe that's the channel this is from. Kingcore Consulting. Is that too? Let me know if it's too loud. I boosted the audio just a bit, but it might be a bit too loud. Let me know.
And I've been recruiting for the past 23 years.
I'm Natasha Kahimkar, CEO of Melita Advisors, and I've been in people talent in DEIB for over 25 years.
DEIB for over 25. Come on, Debbie, it's right there. Just say that you're a Debbie consultant. 23 years, but equity, okay, the E, at least as far as I know, the E and the B were not part of the conversation or the description, except for within the last, 4 years, maybe. 4 or 5 years. So why 23 years? Okay.
I'm Michael Case, and after 20 years, I've accepted that I'm a recruiter, and I will always be a recruiter.
That sounds kind of sad. No variation in life, no variety, no diversity. That sounded actually kind of morose. I've accepted that I'm a recruiter, and I will always be a recruiter. Mr. Grady, aren't you the caretaker here? No, sir. You're the caretaker. You've always been the caretaker.
I'm Matthew Caldwell, CEO of Rocket Power, and I've been in the recruiting world for over 20 years.
Rocket Power! Rocket Power. What was that fake ad? Oh, there was an ad for a fake energy drink way back when there was a series of skits. Oh, I forget what it was called. Rocket Juice or something. I don't know.
All right, sure. Yeah.
You all ready?
All right. Well, welcome back.
This is a sequel. Okay. Yeah, I've never heard of this company before. As far as I know, I've never heard of any of these consultants before, so this will all be new to me.
This session is going to be something that has just ebbed and flowed like everything that we've seen in the market the last 2-3 years. And I think it's more critical to talk about it right now than ever because it seems to be getting lost in the shuffle, and that's.
Don't tell me that diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging is getting lost in the shuffle. I've done far too many videos that have been released in the last month alone.
Diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging.
It's not lost in the shuffle. Dude, you are part of a multi-billion-dollar industry right now. Okay, the amount of money that's being dropped on DEI initiatives is insane. And I said this last week, and I'm very curious to see what happens. Given that most of the arguments I hear to justify DEI programs in businesses and organizations are underpinned by the same arguments that were just made in the affirmative action cases before the Supreme Court. If the Supreme Court decides, and it's possible, I don't know yet, we'll find out in the next few months, if the Supreme Court decides affirmative action as a policy and practice is unconstitutional, and thus all the arguments justifying and defending it are backing up an unconstitutional theory of how to treat people in organizations, the entire DEI infrastructure could becoming toxic, like absolutely legally toxic, as if it shouldn't already be, before the next year is through. But everybody's still talking about it. There's going to be such a rush to squeeze as much juice and money out of this process as possible before the Supreme Court rules, because I have a feeling that if the DEI collective doesn't have the affirmative action theory to run for cover under when it comes to legal questions of what they're doing, once that's gone, there's going to be a lot of problems. And there's going to be a lot of people looking backwards at what's been going on in the whole DEI thing for the last several years, going, maybe we shouldn't have been doing that the entire time. Maybe what we were doing was pushing unconstitutional, illegal, unethical practices onto people and violating people's civil rights. But all that aside, no, it has not been lost in the shuffle. What are you talking about?
So, really just leading off, what are you seeing in the market today? Like now that it's we're always just talking about recession.
Really?
What's actually happening now?
We're talking about inflation. I mean, that is, contributing to a recession and everything else, but what has that got to do with DEI? DEI surmounts any economic situation. It doesn't matter what's going on with the economy. DEI is the air that we live and breathe in, right? In most companies. It's got to be practice. It's got to be a shift in culture. It's not affected by the market, is it? Yeah, I think everybody at the table too is like, what the hell are you talking about?
In this world, in that area,
yeah.
I think it's interesting. We see.
Mm-hmm. They don't even know what's going on.
I felt like for a while. Earlier, maybe 3 or 4 years ago, leaders in companies would talk about it almost because they felt like they had to, or like it was checking a box.
Yeah, and it's so changed since then. It's no longer a must-have element to your portfolio or your prospectus for other companies to even work with you. All right, like Goldman Sachs, they won't work with a company that doesn't have at least one woman on their board of directors. And you've got other companies that will interrogate you on what is your DEI practice? And if you don't have one, they won't do business. So it's basically just a bolt-on necessity. It's got very little to do with doing good anymore. It's just necessary for business because everybody's trying to make themselves look like they're totally not discriminatory, using discriminatory practices. And
I do feel like maybe the last 2 or 3 years, it became genuine and real that companies were thinking about it. But I'm a little worried about some of the things I've seen recently where as things get tighter, as the budgets get tighter, companies start thinking about their spend and their runway and all these types of things.
Yeah, like most companies that are responsible with the money that they have or the money of their shareholders should be. So does DEI require an irresponsible business model? Is that what you're saying?
Especially in the startup world that we work in. Like when you think about it from a recruiting perspective, actually putting an effort forth to try and go create a diverse pipeline of candidates to help hire diverse individuals.
That help hire? Listen to this. Hire diverse individuals. Okay, we all already know what diverse means. So hiring people on the basis of their aesthetic. Yeah, tell me more.
it has to be a completely different initiative. It can't be, you can't approach it the same way you approach your normal traditional recruiting.
Yeah, because normal traditional recruiting says, do you have the requisite skills and experience and education necessary to fulfill this role? Then let's talk and see if there's anything that the recruiter or otherwise senses may or may not fit for the company. And then you move on. Oh, instead with the DEI practice, with DEI recruiting and diversity recruitment, it is not the standard, because you're not caring so much about merit. You're caring about demographic fit in making your workforce look appropriate. Yeah, you're right. They're two different processes. They're completely different
methods, and there has to be an extra investment financially. It just comes down to you have to spend the money on different initiatives, different outreach tactics, different interview tactics.
You have to spend the money on my business. If I'm a diversity consultant, my business is you investing in me to make sure your company is diverse. So basically, what I'm hearing is, companies are having to reassess their budgets, what they're spending their money on and everything else, and they're looking at that DEI thing, and they're not seeing a return on this investment, because ultimately it doesn't matter what the color or genitals of the worker is so much as, does this person do their job well? And we've been doing this stuff for like the last 5-6 years of just recruiting people and putting in these nudge, nudge, wink, wink filters, and we're not getting a return on it. Maybe we should think about cutting our budget on DEI stuff, which is what these guys make their livings off of. So of course they're worried, because they cannot prove a return. As many times as I've heard, oh, diverse teams are more innovative and they're more profitable and da-da-da-da-da. And you ask, well, how? And they can never seem to give an answer. Oh, they have different experiences, this, that. Yeah, but what does that have to do with the color of their skin? What does that have to do with their genitals? What does it have to do with anything other than their merits as individuals? How do you correlate that, right? Correlation, causation. Oh, our company has this demographic split, and we have a lot of money. We must be successful because of our demographic split. It's God of the gaps theory, right? It's complete God of the gaps theory. So yeah, this guy's worried about losing his income, because as time goes on, it's becoming harder and harder to prove that any of this actually amounts to an advantage.
Different teams. And when things get tight, it seems like oftentimes that's one of the things that people, it's like one of the first things that they cut.
Why? Why is that? Why is that?
Or they say, oh, well, we still want the diversity, but this team here that's doing all this other work, can they just spend 30% of their time and fill the funnel with 30% of the candidates? And so I'm a little worried with what we're going to see during this time period, especially in the startup world, that might not actually be a focus, at least from the recruiting side of it.
Well, okay, it's the numbers, dude. It really is the numbers. Can you prove that what you're doing increases the value of the companies you're working for? And I mean prove, not just say, oh, look, things went up a little bit after we started DEI, therefore it's successful. No, it's about long-term patterns. Does it actually achieve anything? Are you doing any better now than you were before by tacking on an extra expense of a DEI initiative, corporate officer program, whatever? Thank you, Matt Barnes. No return on investment from DEI. Why, Scribe, how could that be? Well, this is what I mean, if the DEI process, right, if it was provably increasing the value of a company on the money side of things, not the PR side of things, not the pat ourselves on the back side of things, if there was actual connection between DEI and profit increase or revenue increase, well, then the argument would already be made for itself. You don't cut DEI. I mean, before DEI, we were making X. After DEI, we're making 5 times X. And there's no other factor that went into that. So obviously, we have to keep it. I mean, you would think after this much time and this much exercise, it would be an easy argument for one of these guys to make to a company why you don't cut your DEI budget. But the fact that he's scared, the fact that he says it's the first thing they look at, why is it the first thing they look at? I'm wondering if he's going to explain that to us.
For a while, until the budgets turn around, until people feel comfortable that they're going to have the ability to go get more money and continue to grow. That's, I think that's my initial thought about the current state of things.
Yeah. Are they going to have more money to throw into this wood chipper? Because that's all you're doing with money when it comes to DEI process. If you're not looking at people's skills, merits, abilities, education, and so on, and are just first front-loading all your decision-making on the basis of aesthetics, you're doing yourself and your company a disservice. Doesn't matter what the look of your company is. Does your company produce? It's very pragmatic. It's the cold equations of things. So yeah, why is it the first to go? Are you guys going to reflect on that reality?
It's interesting. I also agree that the thinking has evolved on it, and that CEOs and boards of startups do realize that it's important.
But
I don't know if building on that, I don't know if they really put their money where their mouth is or where their belief is. And what I see...
No, it's not about belief, dude. Come on. You guys are right on the edge of the true and real question of this entire endeavor. Is what you do for a living advantageous to a company's success? Yes or no? If the answer is yes, prove it. If the answer is no, you might as well get up and walk away from the table and go find a job doing something other than recruiting, even though you've said you can do nothing else.
See is, if you look at exec teams of startups, it's mostly male. And then when they finally get around to hiring their first head of HR, they insist it should be a female.
And around this table, how are you guys reflective of that pattern not be... Okay, so again, you don't care about someone's skills. Your first concern is, okay, so it shouldn't be a female. Head of HR should not be a female. Okay, so here's the rule, guys. If you're going to hire a head of HR, exclude women. Is that what the lesson here is?
So they'll have diversity, which is the world's biggest cop-out, right? Like, that would be interesting if it was the head of product or the head of eng, but no, it's the head of HR.
Okay, so the head of HR shouldn't be a woman. If you hire a woman to be the head of HR, regardless of what her qualifications are, regardless if she's choosing to seek that position of her own agency and volition, avoid hiring a woman as HR, because that's just cliche, guys. That's just cliche. Okay, this is the new rule. This is what to avoid from our diversity, equity, and inclusion consultant.
And then when that person joins, they're like, okay, now this is your responsibility. Go figure it out.
Yeah, that's usually how it is when you're the head of a department, when you come in and say that you have the requisite skills and experience to be a leader and create an action plan and organize and supervise. That's what delegation's all about. Because if I'm the CEO of a company and I'm a math guy and I have no idea how HR works, I hire someone who has the requisite skills, experience, and education to be an HR person. So I don't have to worry about it. What? Did I miss something here?
And you're not going to have any budget.
You're not going to have any budget. The HR department in your company, go do this job, you're not going to have any budget. Well, how will you pay me? You're not going to get paid. This is a volunteer position. Didn't you know you're working for a nonprofit? Nobody gets paid and not...
That's sort of the experience that I've seen the last few years. I may just be jaded.
Jaded? Dude, tell me, list off the companies that have an HR department with zero budget. And that's what they told the person they've hired to run their HR department after they've already been given the job. Welcome to the company. You have no budget. I mean, a small budget, an inadequate budget. Okay, I could see that, depending on the circumstances. So what your advice is to dump more into just HR in general. Human resources is more than just diversity, equity, and inclusion, right?
But that's what I've seen.
Okay.
It's been interesting. The focus on the D part of DEIB is still very, very strong, right? So companies, when they start to look at
they're really focused on the D, that's for sure.
Diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, focus on representation first.
Representation. Businesses are not a representative body. Okay, you're not elected. I love it when they talk about representation. Like, okay, well, then I have to assume that our speaker at the table represents all women, right? They don't represent themselves. They don't represent their own histories and their own abilities and character. Somehow they represent their demographic.
And they typically look to talent acquisition to address that.
They look to talent acquisition to shore off recruiting people on the basis of their demographic fit. Yes, it's true.
The gap that I see most significantly is that companies rarely want to get into equity.
What does that mean? What do you mean rarely get it? If you mean equity as in equality of outcome, just give people an outcome regardless of their effort or ability. Yeah, most companies would probably not want to do that because it's not efficient and you just put people into positions that aren't qualified to be there oftentimes.
But the big challenge is the willingness to participate in inclusion and belonging to make that happen.
What does that mean?
So you bring in all these great folks.
Are they great? Because you're talking about representation, not merit.
And then you do nothing to make them want to stay.
Like what? Like what would you suggest? Or do you have an active example?
And that sort of continuity of focus on DEIB is still not as prevalent as I think we would all like it to be.
What does that mean?
It also means, so Michael, to your point, that you can't make diversity all about recruiting. Where's the rest of the story? The inclusion and belonging doesn't come from an HR function or people and talent function or even a chief diversity officer. It comes from the day-to-day interactions with a team and with someone's manager. So
I've turned off the background music. It was starting to bug me for some reason against the noise of the video itself. It'd also be a good test to see if there's a great increase or decrease in my voice audio quality with it on or off, because I'm getting kind of wary of having the background music on if it's interfering with things. You guys let me know. What are you talking about? What do you mean? I'm going to go back a little bit just to review what she said a second, because I want to listen to that one more time, just a little bit more.
To make them want to stay.
Right. What? How do you make them want? You're talking about retention. Okay. So you've recruited people on the basis of their look first and foremost, right? Okay. That's the diversity part. The equity part you haven't described, but I can only assume, based on past as prologue, we're talking about equality of outcome, giving people the same position, the same pay, the same whatevers, just on the basis of they got there. They're in the room, not necessarily because they've earned it. Okay, but now you want to retain these individuals. Okay, well, if you take someone who isn't qualified for a job or to do a particular thing and you put them into a job they're not qualified for, what's going to happen? Right? It's the same thing as if you put, let's say you take somebody who is like they've had 3 years of math and you put them into a class where the prerequisite is 8 years of math. They're not going to know what to do. They're going to feel lost. They're going to feel disconnected. They're going to get frustrated. The tasks that they're given, they're not going to be able to complete effectively, and it's going to show. And so they're going to get frustrated and probably quit because expectations are higher than their skill, right? And or you get that imposter syndrome thing where you show up and you don't feel like you belong there or should be there because you've been recruited on the basis of things that have nothing to do with the job you're given. And then you might quit. So how do you fool someone into thinking that they've been placed there because they earned it when they didn't, and that they're qualified to be there when they're not? I guess that ultimately, in my mind, has to be what inclusion and belonging is about. And you're just creating this Potemkin village of a functional company is all you're doing.
And that sort of continuity of focus on DEIB is still not as prevalent as I think we would all like it to be. It also means, so Michael, to your point, that you can't make diversity all about recruiting.
It is all about recruiting. Well, it's also about promotion. You're right. It's not just about recruiting. It's about promotion, putting people into positions of authority, supervisory roles, the C-suite roles, also on the basis of what they look like. Like that's some profound statement. Okay, explain yourself. It's not just about recruiting. What is it about?
Where's the rest of the story? The inclusion and belonging doesn't come from an HR function or people and talent function or even a chief diversity officer.
Oh, it doesn't? Oh, where does it come from?
It comes from the day-to-day interactions with a team and with someone's manager.
No. Interpersonal interactions and relationships have nothing to do with diversity. Okay? Nothing. You talked about representation. What are you? Did I miss something? Did I mishear her? Sorry, I don't mean to keep doing this, but I just want to make sure I understand this.
It also means,
okay.
So Michael, to your point, that you can't make diversity all about recruiting. Where's the rest of the story? The inclusion and belonging doesn't come from
Oh, my apologies. Inclusion and belonging. It comes from interaction with your manager. Okay, well, how does your manager, or how should a manager, correctly interact with someone to make sure they feel included and belong?
HR function or people and talent function or even a chief diversity officer. It comes from the day-to-day interactions with a team and with someone's manager.
Okay, so how do you set that up? How do you orchestrate that? I apologize. I got so muddled in what I was hearing. I was like, diversity has nothing to do with this, that. Okay, so inclusion and belonging. The social fabric of your company. How do they get along? Well, let me ask you something. If someone doesn't know how to do their job or they're not qualified, how do you think that relationship's going to go between the manager and the subordinates?
So the opportunity that we have is to not ask our talent acquisition leaders or our HR leaders or our chief diversity officers to be responsible for the representation, because the representation isn't just about bringing people in the door.
Yes. Okay. Now that part, what? Wait. The representation isn't about bringing people in the door. It is. The whole representation theory is we don't have enough of X type of person in our company. We don't have this type of person, quote unquote, representing this demographic in our company. It's entirely about bringing people in the door. That's the first question. Is the candidate representative of a non-representative group, right? Or underrepresented group, I often hear. So if you have a choice between a candidate that's from an underrepresented group or a straight white male, which one do you think the DEI process is going to look to first?
It's keeping them. It's not just keeping them, but it's helping people grow and having people excel in an organization and feel that they have opportunity to grow.
What does that have to do with representation? What does that have to do with the aesthetic of the individual? How is that not applicable to any business or organization where you're bringing someone in on the ground floor and you're conceivably trying to retain this person and bring them into the company and teach them your ways and make them a better worker and make them, more productive over time? What does that have to do with diversity? That has nothing to do with diversity. That's just good business practice or the ideal sort of employee, advancement in any particular company or organization. And look at this guy. I don't know. Ever since he said, I'm a recruiter and I will always be a recruiter, I cannot help but see this guy's eyes as just dead inside.
That's the part that's often forgotten. I'm really excited, though, that I'm seeing a lot more executive teams wanting to understand DEIB and the role that they can play. So a learning journey is how we describe it, because you're never really done. So the way I describe DEIB to execs and to anyone.
To execs and anyone is, you need to hire me and you can never let me go. Keep those paychecks rolling in because it's an endless journey. We'll always be learning together.
It's like an ultra marathon, but the course changes, the weather changes unexpectedly, and there isn't a finish line.
Oh, yeah.
And I tell that story not to make people feel disheartened or not to make people upset or, oh my goodness, what are we stepping into here?
But instead, I tell them that to let them know that my job can never go away. I have employment security if there's no finish line.
But it's more to understand that there are so many factors that come into play when we talk about diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging.
Are there?
These are big words, each of which have their own, it's a whole field of study in each one of them.
Define diversity. One sentence. Most words only need about one sentence worth of text to define it. So in your business, what is diversity? Define equity. They're big words, but they have very short definitions when it comes to actual practicality and implementation in your business. What do they mean? Define your terms.
So to think that we're going to come in, do some training, or change the performance management system or the recruitment process, and we're done, it's not even remotely reasonable.
Right. Because there is no goal. There is no definition. There is no end point. When you don't define what the finish line is, you're right, you'll never will have one. And people keep throwing money at it just to say that they're doing it.
It is a journey because sometimes you might be able to do things on your own. Sometimes you may need somebody to come in and help you accelerate. Sometimes you're going to get things wrong. Right? The language we use changes. So this idea of it being a journey and to recognize that we're all going to be on the journey together.
Forever.
And sometimes I'm going to have a rough time or I'm going to make a mistake and you're going to step in and help me out that time. And in another time, you may have a challenge and I'll be able to step in and help you stay strong too.
What are you taught? Stay strong. I'm going to help you. Yeah, if you're coworkers or something, but that's not what you're talking about. You're talking about the utility and the value of what you do for a living. You said you spent 23 years in this. Okay. Well, why do you constantly have to make an argument for its value? You should have the 30 seconds, like sales pitch, the elevator pitch, down to a science at this point. You should be able to offer up examples of here's where company X was when I came in, and here's where they were 2 years later after my work. And I can prove that what I did led to these successes because of X, Y, and Z. It should be shop talk that is easily rolled off your tongue at this point. But still, you're giving us nothing but gobbledygook and buzzwords. 23 years in this. I mean, again, nice work if you can get it. If this is all it takes to be a DEI executive or consultant, man, I could be making bank.
That we're constantly learning, we're constantly growing, and that it belongs to all of us. So I actually stay away from the debate of where should the diversity role report, because in the end, that's not the important question.
That's not the important question? If a business asks, like, what are we getting out of this investment?
The important question is, how invested are we all in DEIB, and how are we approaching it?
No. How much are we invested in this thing? Well, why are we invested in this thing? Well, this thing makes us feel and sound good about ourselves. Yeah, but what return does it bring us? How does it increase our bottom line? That's not the point. That's not the important question. But we're a business. Yes, but we need to do this in order to make people know that we're a good business. But if we're spending money on things that don't make the company money, that's not good business. Stop asking questions.
Where? You included in the last few things you said, and where brings me to remote?
Where brings me to remote? I just have to point out real quick that I'm going to have to call HR real quick. Real quick. I'm going to have to call HR because Lexi Mads is apparently feeling everybody up. Lexi, that is inappropriate for the chat room. Stop that now. And see, I'm not a female, so as an HR supervisor, I'm more diverse. I broke new ground. That's what I did. Okay, sorry, you were saying something about remote what now?
All in DEIB, and how are we approaching it?
Where? You included in the last few things you said, and where brings me to remote. I don't think there'll be any argument here that inclusion and belonging was a problem before the pandemic hit. I think all of us were saying it. We've had many times where we sidebar, we have coffee or whatever, and lamented the fact that we had the ability to bring people in, as you were saying, but the inability to keep them. Now all of a sudden we're in a remote world. And probably at best it'll be a hybrid. It has completely changed.
Yeah, it's going to be more focused on people actually getting their work done and not their socialization skills. You're going to have to prove your output through work and merit and skill more so than you're being able to chat somebody up in the office. I don't know. I'm not saying that remote working purely is a 100% positive. There is definitely an advantage, depending on the business and depending on what you're doing, to being in the room with the other people you work with and being able to solve problems, think things through, go over to somebody's desk, work something out, that kind of thing. There's no 100% solution or benefit one to the other. But I think remote working is going to end up very much filtering out the wheat from the chaff, as it were, when it comes to just purely the productivity and the quality of work as the bare bones metric, and not so much of the personality game. It's really going to depend position to position, business to business. But yeah, where do these guys fit in? Where does a DEI program fit in when at the end of the day, you're just sending files and typing up things and doing entry or doing other organizational work remotely? And it's not so much about having to face the person. It can just be like me, an avatar on a screen, talking at a meeting and getting things done and moving on with my day. See, there's a lot of dangers for the DEI situation right now between the legal questions, the budgetary questions, and now the necessity of it when people aren't actually having to interact with each other all the time.
How do you do it now? How do you make it? Is inclusion and belonging getting better because now we sit in Zoom windows? Is it getting worse? What does that look like now?
And the where question is something I thought about for a long time because I worked abroad for the first 15 years of my career.
Oh, I worked abroad once and
And diversity and inclusion and belonging, they all felt or meant different things. I was in Japan for the most part, but also covering Asia. And later on, I worked in Latin America as well. And so all these definitions are just different in these places.
Yeah. How do you work diversity into a landscape where everybody looks the same and your entire options for talent pool all come from the same racial and or ethnic demographic for the most part? How do you work that? What do you have to focus on at that point? I suppose just gender?
But the belonging was always an issue. We were always in a remote office. So headquarters was one way and had lots of resources and kind of the in crowd and the cool kids. And we were, half the day or in a different time, in a completely different time of day, so that the headquarters was sleeping and we were working, or vice versa.
Yes, international time zones are a thing.
I think with the U.S. going remote and open remote locations, and also just generally companies moving out of the Bay Area and exploring more locations, we're seeing and being reminded that the U.S. has a lot of cultures that are often regionally influenced as well.
You're only now you're realizing this? Okay.
And that's a whole different paradigm to be working with. I had one client, for example, where
for what? Example? Be still my heart.
Their San Francisco office were like, no one ever wants to come back to the office.
Yeah.
But they had an Indiana office, and everyone's like, when can we get back to the office?
Yeah, because it's kind of a different work ethic from the Midwest to the West Coast, if you can believe it. I wonder what engendered such thinking on things. I can't possibly imagine between Indiana and the Bay Area what the cultural philosophy might be about work.
Because, if you have a 5,000 square foot home, you just have no place to work, right? So, unlike in the city. And it was something they had to navigate. So I think it opens up a whole, the shifting nature of work now opens up a whole host of avenues that also have to be considered, which is where I think traditionally we're thinking about just diversity, right? As Natasha mentioned, now it's even more complex.
Okay, well, you didn't really answer anything with that little anecdote, and you didn't really say anything just there. It was just about diversity. It's always been about diversity. Everything that's been tacked on to it, as far as I'm concerned, is trying to dilute the inherent question of, is it legal to recruit people on the basis of their appearance? Right? Because when somebody starts asking you to define what amounts to a diverse person, what is a diverse candidate? Define a non-diverse candidate. And you start once you start asking these very basic questions about defining terms, you find out very quickly it has nothing to do with merit. It has everything to do with aesthetic. And so every time they tack on a new letter, it's just trying to dilute the reality of what you're actually doing, the core of what you're actually promoting, and how it might be not only unethical, but also conceivably illegal. If a company decides to take your advice, at least, and enact your recommendations about how to hire people. Thank you again, Matt Barnes. I bet this is a hit on the African continent or in, say, Southeast Asia. Sorry, everybody. I'll show myself out. Yeah, the DEI really only works in America, Canada, Germany, places with a melting pot of cultures and peoples all over the place. If you go to parts of the world where the entire population or the vast majority are all the same ethnicity, how does DEI work at that point? Right? Your only mechanism there is probably gender, I suppose, and depending on how far you get into the weeds of things, maybe their orientation, that kind of thing. Other than that, what do you do? But yeah, it's similar to I was talking about last week with employee resource groups, and how oftentimes you'll hear a whole bunch of listings of employee resource groups, like the Women's ERG and the African American ERG and the LGBT ERG, and then they'll mention the Veterans ERG, and it's almost always an afterthought or fourth or fifth down on the list. And it always causes a little bit of a mental speed bump because, like, oh, well, being a veteran, that's a mark of someone's merit, their personal effort. It doesn't denote any particular demographic, save for people who have been in the military. Oh, and it feels like it's kind of, as an insulating device to make it feel less like it's all discriminatory on the basis of things that have nothing to do with your merit. That's what every additional letter after the D in DEIB or whatever is for, in my opinion. It's just to continually try to make it sound better than what the core of the message actually is. So what is diversity?
I don't have the answers to it, but I think it's things that need to be thought about.
Wait. You don't have the answer. How many years? You said something like, 20 years you've been doing this? You're just a recruiter? Hold on.
So I think it opens up a whole, the shifting nature of work now opens up a whole host of avenues that also have to be considered, which is where I think traditionally we're thinking about just diversity, right? As Natasha mentioned, now it's even more complex. I don't have the answers to it, but I think it's things that need to be thought about.
Yeah, they need to be thought about. Why aren't you thinking about them? You don't have any ideas after all years of experience? Okay. Bridget, Scribelight. Japan is very much a meritocracy. They have a 2-month interview period at the end of their college term. These initiatives aren't popular here. They do have gender-based programs, but they don't advertise too publicly. I can believe it. And I mean, I'm not an economist. Somebody would have to tell me. In relative terms, how is Japan's economy compared to America? I mean, not just in like total numbers. I'm talking about in relative terms. I mean, have they been increasing, going up, down, otherwise? How's their productivity, their output, their innovation, and so on? I mean, hiring people on the basis of what they can do, what they know, what they've been trained to do. Heaven forfend that be your first and only go-to. Heaven forfend that actually be what the Civil Rights Act was meant to do. And everything these guys end up talking about is trying to turn the clock back on that principle. And again, somehow nobody seems to care. The companies are just like falling all over themselves to dump money on this stuff because virtue, because George Floyd, because quote unquote, it's the right thing to do. Is it though? Yeah, we're going to find out sooner rather than later, I think.
That remote question and hybrid build inclusion, because now all of a sudden collectively the employees are saying we're in this together. So
as opposed to before when they weren't in it together. I mean, I suppose if you have this sort of like lockdown survivor syndrome thing going on, like we had during the pandemic, where everybody was sheltering from the catastrophe. Yeah, there's a lot of humanity that can come out of an emergency, but you can't maintain that emergency cadence for very long. People will wear out real quick. That's where that comes from. Is that all other differences aside, we're all in this together in order to move through this crisis. But you can't have a perpetual crisis. It doesn't work in the long run. It might get the people in charge a lot of power in the short term because people are looking to them for advice, leadership, answers. But you can't keep it up. People will wear down. People will break.
It's almost like an inadvertent way of making us all feel belong. A common thread, if you will.
Yeah, a common thread of crisis, a common thread of fear. That's what the pandemic was. Yeah, there was this TV movie many, many years ago that was talking about, I think it was the Northridge earthquake in California back in the 90s or whatever. And with like the freeway pancaked on top of itself. And it was one of those instances where, it's really sappy writing, but it really, underpinned a truth because it was telling real life events. All these random people stuck out on the freeway. Nobody knew each other, right? You probably got people from all different types of backgrounds, political theories, religious theories, whatever else. But in this moment, they were all part of this emergency. And the emergency was there are people trapped in there and we need to get them out. So you had all of these civilians, right? A lot of people not even trained in emergency work, not necessarily medical professionals or something, but they knew they had to do something. And you had all these strangers coming together to help people in need. And for a minute, everybody was on the same team, regardless of any other factor. Yeah, that does happen. And it is a remarkable reflex of human empathy and cooperation when you see that happen. It reminds you that there are some things more fundamental to us than our personal mores, our personal beliefs, our personal politics. Those things can be very inspiring, right? But again, you cannot maintain crisis mode forever. All right, that's not something you want to look at as a positive or as an ongoing plan.
So I don't know, Natasha, what are your thoughts on the remote world around this?
I think hybrid and remote opens up a door to bring in more representation.
How? Representation. You're going straight back to diversity again. I thought it wasn't all about diversity. Representation. Well, how?
At the same time, I think we have this belief that the technology that we use because we're remote, so whatever your video conferencing technology is, that it solves for inclusion and it solves for belonging.
Wait. How does it increase representation? What are you talking about? Why do I constantly have to ask that question of people who claim to be professionals in this? I know that they're all sitting around the table talking shop, and sometimes you don't go into deep details with people you assume already know the answers to some terms and concepts and things. But at the same time, how? How does hybrid or remote working increase representation? How?
But there are no shortcuts with management.
They're not.
And I think people say, oh, well, I'm on Zoom and everybody's the same equal size box, so it's okay.
What?
But the reality is we're still not taking into account how do we draw out the people who may not naturally participate or may not naturally contribute early in a conversation.
Everybody gets a turn. Everybody gets a turn. I have a weekly conference call for my work. Okay. And we had a week before the pandemic, we had a weekly meeting where we'd all get in the conference room and sit down, and everybody would go around the table in their turn, and they'd have to say, okay, what are you working on this week? What are you working on in the future? What problems have you encountered, etc. Everybody had to do a report. It's a very, very organized little meeting, if you can believe it. Everybody gets a turn. You know, you have this person talk, and then this person talk, and then this person talk, and this person talk. And at the very end, and people ask questions and they interact with each other, etc. We still do that now on the phone conference. That's how you do that. You make sure that everybody is required to speak. Even if you don't have anything much to say, like, well, I did my job this week, nothing crazy happened. I had no phone calls, had no issues, da-da-da. If your report is 5 minutes or 15 minutes, you cover the ground of what's going on in your job for the week, and then you're done. And then the boss will ask questions, or maybe somebody else has a question, or there's a new project coming up. That's how you do that. That is that some kind of like voodoo magic or something that you've just never heard of before?
Who's talking more?
The person who has more to say.
Whose opinion carries more weight?
The person who has the bigger paycheck and is responsible for other people's successes.
These are not things that technology is going to solve. It's not.
What does that have to do with anything? Those elements of a business meeting or a hierarchy in a business have been in place since time began. Okay, well, if that's the problem, how do you solve for that problem? If you have someone who is the head of IT, is their opinion on something going to carry more weight than the guy they just hired for an internship? Yes. But that's a problem, I guess? Or that's something you have to like resolve? How would you suggest that be resolved?
These are not things that remote or hybrid will solve either.
No, they solve. How are those problems? How is someone being more of an authority on a subject than somebody else a problem? Their word carries more weight. They have more to say. So what do you do? Are you going to segment everybody's time so that you only have 5 minutes on a counter, and even if I cut you off in the middle of a sentence, that's it? We have to give everybody equal time? Okay, if someone's word carries more weight than somebody else, that's something that needs to be solved. How do you do that? What would you suggest?
It still requires managers to be great managers. It still requires team members to pay attention to the dynamics.
Yes, what? Am I missing something here? Is she saying anything right now?
In their team. So that we are welcoming in and inviting in different perspectives.
Well, what if my perspective sucks? What if I know nothing about IT? What if I'm a data entry guy who never works with systems? What if I have no perspective? What if I have no idea what the other department is doing because I don't work in that department? If it's not my turn to talk, should I say anything? If I don't have anything to offer, should I say anything? What do you mean? What does any of this mean?
Depending, maybe people are coming from a different industry. I'm not talking about just the traditional, when we think about diversity, about people of color, gender, race and ethnicity, or veteran status.
You see? Do you see? Every time. Do not include veterans in that list. Okay? Veterans is a mark of someone having done something, of having sacrificed something, of having given their time and their life to something, and it doesn't matter what they look like or who they sleep with. But you always tack that on at the very end to blunt the obvious problem with everything that comes before it. A factor of merit against a list of descriptors. It is amazing, isn't it? Good gravy. I want to hear that again. That was just something else. Did I call that? Am I psychic or something?
There's team members to pay attention to the dynamics in their team, so that we are welcoming in and inviting in different perspectives. Depending, maybe people are coming from a different industry. I'm not talking about just the traditional, when we think about diversity, about people of color, gender, race and ethnicity, or veteran status. I'm getting beyond that.
Are you, though? Are you? If you're getting beyond that, if it's not necessary to consider, then why are you considering it?
That technology isn't going to solve for some of the core challenges we have with inclusion and belonging.
What challenges? People's authority in their department? How much time they take to talk? Again, what would you suggest be done to solve these problems that transcend remote working?
Those are about behaviors. They're about our behaviors, and technology isn't gonna fix that.
Look, she's got a look on her face like she says something very profound. Okay, the behaviors of deferring to someone who knows more about a subject than you do. The behaviors of someone talking more than somebody else. I guess it depends on what they're saying, as if it's relevant to anything, but that aside, so what? How would you solve for this problem? How is it a problem in the first place? You're getting beyond race, gender, orientation, on and on and on. To what? Merit? I don't even know what's going on anymore. Thank you again, Matt Barnes. I feel like veterans is the think of the children for DEI. It's the way that it comes across, again, is more of a blunting mechanism to criticism over the intention of the program, right? Or this is probably maybe the more ridiculous notion, is that it's putting on a level playing field the idea that military service, merit, self-sacrifice is equal with your race, is as equal a consideration as your gender, that simply being something is the same as doing something. That's probably the most ridiculous thing of it, that they keep throwing that in there. You know, and as far as I'm concerned, it really feels like, and I'm not a veteran, so I can't speak from personal experience, but to throw that in there amongst all those other things that say nothing about a person's character, nothing about their abilities, nothing about their merit, to throw that in there feels like an insult. It really does. It feels like it's almost insulting. It's like a backhanded compliment or something. That's what it feels like to me as an observer. I can't speak for veterans. I'd be curious to know what any veterans in my audience think about it, regardless of what I think. I just feel like it's such a backhanded use of an entire part of our society that should be given, at least on their face, more respect than someone who just happens to be a particular race or happens to be a particular gender. It just, that's the part that bugs me. Yeah, that was really profound, huh, guys? Got nothing to say about that?
Actually, I'm a little concerned about it.
Okay.
With the remote nature, because a lot of people, the only time they're around individuals that were diverse from them is when they were in the office, when they would go to the city, when they go around where they work. When they go back home, they're around those people that they have been around, that they're comfortable with, that they know. And the times that they get outside of that comfort zone is oftentimes when they leave their neighborhood, when they leave that little area that they spend time with and those people that they're around. And there could be diversity in their neighborhood, but it's limited.
Yeah. You know all those racists that just don't get out there, all those sexists that just don't get out there interacting with other people all the time? So why would you want somebody like that in your office in the first place? If their vision of people, society, and otherwise is so narrow that they can't see beyond their own front doorstep unless they walk outside their front doorstep, maybe you want them in a remote location just doing work and not interacting with people. Oh, well, this is for the good of society, is it? Interacting with other people, going outside your house? I mean, that's got some merit to it, I suppose. What do you have to do with that? What does that have to do with anything? What does that have to do with the bottom line?
What I worry about is we also see this with people in general in society with what's gone on the last couple of years and being at home.
Yeah.
A lot of people become very, like, they've become a little bit more focused around a smaller circumference of political, social ideologies of all sorts.
I don't know if you were paying attention before the pandemic. Same thing.
Because they're in their smaller bubbles and they're in their smaller circle, and they don't get exposed to other individuals.
You don't care about perspective. You don't care about politics or thinking. You're talking about aesthetic. You're talking about people interacting with people that don't look like they do. Come on. I can interact with people on a perspective belief system right now. I mean, I'm doing it right now in a way, but I can do it at any time on Twitter. If I really want to interact with people with different opinions and different perspectives, I can do that. I've been doing that since the message board days of the internet. I mean, the ability to interact with, communicate with, share ideas with people has gone up infinite times, multiple, exponentially in the last 30 years. That's not the problem. You're talking about race. You're talking about gender or ethnicity. That's what you're talking about. You don't want to say it. You keep stumbling right at the second where you're going to be more specific. That's what you're talking about.
And other opinions and other perspectives on things.
No, there is no limit on interacting with people of other opinions and other perspectives. I can do it anytime I want. I'm doing it right now. That's not what you're talking about.
Because they don't have to. Because I can just go to my Facebook group that I like, or my this, that I like.
Yeah, and you know what? Here's the thing, too. Even if there was no pandemic and lockdown, you can still do that. You can create a bubble around yourself. What are you talking about? This isn't new. Only going to the radio stations that speak the truth that I believe in. Only going to the churches that believe that I believe. Only going to the political rallies that believe as I believe. Only reading newspapers that put out the kind of content I want to read and make me feel good about myself. What has that got to do with the lockdown? What has that got to do with remote working? You could do that. You could have done that for the last 30 years and more. Nothing about the current situation changes that, except social media amplifies and enhances things, probably to an unhealthy degree, but that's nothing new.
I can just talk to these people I like, and I don't ever have to get on a train and be around all these other people.
Okay, so basically you see DEI as what? Busing? You know, you're going to end segregation by effectively busing people to where they have to be with other people that look differently than they do? Is that it? Is that how you see your role?
Walk through the city and be around all these other people, and go to an office and be around all these other people. And
if you're just talking straight socialization, yes, remote working, the lockdown and everything else has stunted people's ability to socialize in real life. Doesn't matter about what they look like, but just in real life, social interactions, being able to have a conversation, sit down with people. I fear most for the children of this generation that have had to live through that. You know, we're already seeing the effects of removing children from schools for 2.5+ years and not being able to interact with other kids, how they're being socially stunted, how their educational abilities have been stunted. Yeah, that is what I'm concerned about. And there is something to say about being in cabin fever, lockdown syndrome the whole time. Yeah. But that's not what you're talking about.
In those situations where we have to learn to interact with all these other people in a normal, natural way has gone away when I'm at home. And so I actually am concerned about that. It could put a pause on the progress we've been making around that because people are in their bubbles. They're at home. I mean, they're relocating to Montana or wherever, all these little areas, and even more remote because now on these big ranches and they're not around people. They have chosen, a lot of people have chosen to move to these areas where
it's cheaper. where it's cheaper, maybe. You know, like if I don't have to pay this expensive rent to go into the city to the office, if I can do my same job from somewhere where I can afford a better house and a better life for my children and still do the same work and still make the same pay? Is that what you're going to say? Cheaper?
It's even less diverse than where they were before. And
oh, right. Okay. So I'm going to a place like Montana where there's quote unquote less diverse people, and that's a bad thing. It's got nothing to do with economics. It's got nothing to do with the freedom that comes from, hey, I don't need to be in a physical office to make a living anymore. No, it has to do with, obviously my motivation for working somewhere else than right next to the office is I want to be around my same kind of people. Well, I got news for you, Buckaroo. What is wrong with that? What would you do to solve that problem? If you've got a guy who is an absolute and total racist, an absolute and total xenophobe, and he wants to live on a ranch in Montana and remote in to work to do his job, and then when he's done, he can turn off his computer and be a white supremacist xenophobe on his own time. What would you like to do to solve that problem? I don't know what to tell you, dude. Even if you're right, even if the underlying premise of your statement here is that everybody's having the opportunity now to just be their racist, lockdown, xenophobic selves. We can't allow that. Well, okay, how would you solve for that? What would you do? What is your solution? I hate to tell you this. There are jerks in the world who do just fine. They believe in things you don't believe in. They like to do things you don't like to do. They still have a right to work. They still have a right to do what they want to do so long as they're not violating the law or bothering anybody else. So what would you suggest be done? Even if the worst case scenario of what you're suggesting or, you know, variously implying were to be true. Okay, well then what? What, you going to end remote working? What, you going to force people to work with people they don't want to work with? I mean, they can quit and go somewhere else and be a loner somewhere else.
So I wonder about the long-term impact of that, of the remote culture on inclusion and belonging.
I think you worry about the necessity of your paycheck. That's what I'm hearing here more than anything else. As budgets are reconsidered, as things are reorganized based on the effects of the pandemic and the realization of the lockdown that physical office space isn't a necessity anymore, I think you're worrying about the lifespan of your career. And I can understand that. But you might want to take a look at why that might be. Why is it at risk? Is it because you offer nothing of value ultimately to a company's bottom line?
You might still be able to hire people that are very diverse, but will it be genuine inclusion, belonging in the culture? If I only have to interact with you on Zoom, but I don't have to sit next to you and eat next to you and be in rooms where we're like discussing things, and I have to be forced to see you as a human and respect your opinion and just get past all these biases that are out there. I'm a little worried about that.
You think that in the absence of being in an office with someone, you're not going to respect them as a human or see them as a human or respect their opinions? Come on. Dude, if a business makes more money by not paying out hundreds of thousands of dollars in leasing space each year and can instead have people work remotely, they're not going to care about belonging and inclusion. They're still going to care about output. They're still going to care about keeping someone on who is talented at what they do. You are so worried about your own career, and I get it, but you're not being honest with yourself. You're avoiding the reality of the real questions you should be asking. Is what you guys do for a living valuable?
Yeah. Well, let's put a pin in that one for now. I'd be curious to see, maybe we come back in like a year and see what happened, because I think it's very much a developing situation. Let's start talking about compensation and equity, as you were starting to bring up before.
Yes.
Now we're spread out throughout the country. There's the questions around jobs needing specific skill sets, looking for specific results.
Mm-hmm.
But the thought of you live in a market where you don't get paid as much is starting to be challenged. There's a lot to do with equity in that because of where location is. Have we gained any ground there? Are we doing better?
Did any of you understand what he just said? Okay, I'm sorry. I know this is one of the longest panel discussions just based on the amount of nonsense that's being spoken. But I really need to listen to that again because I'm not quite sure what was being said. Okay.
I'd be curious to see, maybe we come back in like a year and see what happened. Because I think it's very much a developing situation.
Yes.
Let's start talking about compensation and equity, as you were starting to bring up before.
Okay. Yeah.
Now we're spread out throughout the country.
We're spread out throughout the country. I don't know what that means. Your company, people?
There's the questions around jobs needing specific skill sets, looking for specific results.
You mean a job?
But the thought of you live in a market where you don't get paid as much is starting to be challenged.
The thought of living in a market where you don't get paid as much is starting to be challenged. Did anybody else understand that? I didn't understand that.
There's a lot to do with equity in that because of where location is.
Okay, so you're talking about like, if I work for a company that's based in San Francisco, but I'm working from Indiana, since that was kind of their example, is that to say that, oh, we're going to pay you less because you work in Indiana than somebody who works in San Francisco because of where you live? Was that it? I'm really trying to understand this. Thank you, Gunfox61. Scribe, they have zero value. They are more like a waste of time and money. What he just said was a huge word salad of absolutely nothing. Yeah. Again, you've got 4 people around this table, each one of them claiming decades worth of experience in this area. And yet, seemingly, none of them, given no restrictions, I mean, their show is called Unfiltered, can give a hard, concrete, cogent example of how what they do is valuable. Their first concern was budgets are being cut, and we're one of the first things they look at. And I asked the question, why would they do so? If what you do obviously has a value add to the company, its profits, its production, its motivation, on and on and on, why would you guys be the first thing people look at to cut? If you had a provable value in what you do. And somehow they don't want to address that. They don't want to even consider it. I know why. It's self-preservation. If they come onto a show and effectively arrive at the conclusion of what we do is nonsense, well, there goes their entire lifestyle lickety-split. But it's right there. It's floating right there like a ghost. And they just don't want to look at it, but it's still there. Okay, anyway, merit pay, what now?
Have we gained any ground there? Are we doing better? What does that look like?
I don't even know what you asked.
I don't know if you guys saw that article that just came out.
No.
Akiito's.
There's the one about
Business Insider.
Yeah, I can't remember actually. I didn't see who wrote it, but I was looking at the stats around the FANGs, and their compensation has just dropped off the table. Some companies are paying I think Netflix is year over year for the same role, same skill set level, and all that is 68% lower compensation for offers going out now versus a year ago.
Wow.
Well, okay, Netflix as a singular example is probably not the best one. You want to look at patterns, not a specific company, because Netflix has been spending money like a drunken sailor for years on projects and things that had no desire by the consumer to exist, advertising for things that absolutely bombed, left, right, and center. Also, you should talk about Netflix's initiative, Strong Black Lead. You never hear that anymore spoken. I don't even know if it's still active technically, but they had this whole thing, Strong Black Lead, where they had a filter up for what projects they'd accept, what actors they would hire, what directors they would go after on the basis of their race. They don't really talk about that much anymore. I don't know if they advertise it much anymore. It's probably still out there. But yeah, Netflix as a singular example is a bad one because, yeah, they're going to have to cut things because A, they don't have the money they used to. B, their prospects aren't looking too great. And C, yeah, you have a remote workforce and you don't have office space anymore. Might as well cut where you can cut.
Oh, Meta is like 52%.
Yeah, because these companies are falling apart because people don't actually need them anymore. And what they're doing is nonsense. Meta, how many billions are they dumping into creating a metaverse that no one is going to end up using?
Of what it was. I mean, all the big fangs have dropped their compensation dramatically for software engineers, for knowledge workers, which are always the ones that got paid the most.
And why is that? Is that because of a lack of diversity?
And I don't know if that's because they're saying, hey, if you're going to work remote and I'm not having to give you blue bottle coffee and lunch and all these other things, I'm not paying you as much because you're staying at home. I don't know what it is, but it's interesting.
You don't know what it is. You read articles on this and you don't know what it is. Okay, what does that have to do with DEIB?
What's happening right now around compensation for sure.
And you think all those perks would lead them to making more money because now they're not taking advantage of it.
I don't know. It's just and I would love to see how that looks in a year from now.
Or maybe they were operating at a loss in some areas because they were overspending on nonsense like DEI and wine bars and yoga rooms.
As Apple and others say, you have to come back to work a couple days a week, if that might change it. But it's a very interesting stat that was released. And it was like a week ago or a couple days ago.
What does that have
that
to
article
do with
came out.
DEI?
I don't know if you guys all saw it, but it was powerful data.
Wow, all these companies in these similar sectors of the economy are downgrading. And?
Well, that sort of points again to that shift of where the power is in the labor relationship right now. That is kind of flipped almost overnight from a few years of employees really being in charge and being able to chart their own course to now the employers are coming back with the power of their own, I guess.
Well, let's say that that's true. Why would that be? Could it be that putting, quote unquote, the employees in charge was a bad business idea? That it didn't actually lead the company making any profits or being more survivable? Are you? What are you guys talking about now?
No.
So we're seeing that in comp. I think we're seeing that in the return to office situation. We're seeing that in the you are all not working hard enough speeches that have been coming out, right?
Well, did you see the video from Twitter inside the building before Elon Musk took over? I mean, there's a lot to say about the whole Elon Musk thing, but just this is a day in the life of a Twitter worker. Did you see that? I don't know if you saw it. You should look at that. That video, that singular video is setting the tone and really justifying to a lot of people these cuts at these companies.
So it's interesting how fast that change happened, and then wondering when it will shift back the other way too.
Yeah, when will they start paying us more again?
I wonder too, for underrepresented groups, how compensation has shifted. So if you isolate underrepresented groups and their compensation last year versus this year, what the delta is there.
Oh, okay. So what companies are being racist, you mean? Okay, so you're going to draw a line between, I'm going to take all the pay of people on the basis of their demographic, put into one bucket, and compare it to the pay of all the other people based on other demographics and put it into another bucket. Are you going to see that, I don't know, based on population demographics, some buckets are larger than others? Are you going to do the whole wage gap thing?
I'm curious about that.
Well, what's the answer? Well, you're curious about it. Why don't you know? You've been doing this for decades.
From a pay equity perspective,
pay equity.
When companies do pay equity analyses, which many companies are very reluctant to do, often it's not as expensive a shift to make to address any issues that they do identify.
Like what? Okay, I do a scan of my entire company based on racial demographics, and some people are making less than others. Some, I guess I better up their pay to keep up appearances?
But the fear that it could cost millions and millions of dollars stops companies from taking that one little step of working with an organization that is experienced in doing this.
Like yours, right?
And doing a full analysis and identifying where they have hotspots, where they have issues to address. There are a lot more organizations that will work on that for you now. So the capability is certainly there.
Like what you do, right? Your services?
I still am not sure how much companies are taking that into consideration when they think about their salary budgets.
Well, here's why they don't. Here's why companies are reluctant to do that. Because if they do an analysis of people simply on the basis of their racial and or gender demographics and put everything into a giant bucket on one side or the other and put these two numbers next to each other, one's bigger than the other one, what's the first conclusion that you or anybody on the outside who just doesn't understand how pay works is going to make? That company's racist. That company's sexist, whatever else. They're going to draw a God of the gaps conclusion between two disparate statistics. That's all there's going to be. That's all it's going to turn into. That's where your bread and butter is. That's why they hire you, to try to avoid that. Except hiring you to do that also suggests they kind of are making a concession that they are racist or sexist. That's the push-pull relationship between this entire thing. That's the poison pill of it. You know, hiring you guys on is tacitly admitting to the fact that the company has a discrimination problem. But they need to do it because it's so fashionable right now.
Comp budgets. I do know some organizations right now, just comp in general, are allowing promotions but not allowing compensation adjustments for the time being. So that makes it really complicated in terms of retention as well, that you're getting the recognition, sort of.
So that's so short-sighted. I mean, we've dealt with that internally when we were internal. The last company I was at, when I was internal, dealt with that, where we see spikes in compensation for certain roles, and people that were hired 6 months ago are getting paid way less than the people who are getting hired today, and they're worried about like bringing them up to level, but it's super short-sighted because all that means is that those people are going to leave because they're not getting paid what they should be getting paid.
And they're going to replace them.
They're going to have to replace them. They're going to just cost the same amount, and they're going to lose productivity during that delta and that gap. Mm-hmm. So it's a very short-sighted approach when companies take that approach. And
were they doing this before or after your advice? Is this a result of or something that occurred before your involvement? I'm confused. Yeah, if they don't have a predictable and sturdy pay structure for things and set the expectations of advancement and so on, yeah, that's probably not a very organized business, organized HR, etc. Yeah, so if you come into a bad company that doesn't know how to run their business, we're coming up on an hour and a half of real time. We've still got about 10 minutes or so, less than 10 minutes. I'm going to just finish this out. I'm gonna probably start to restrain myself from as much commentary as previous, and just let them talk and make more longer intervals, because I do want to get through this. But man, this has been something else. Watching again, 4 decades-long experienced professionals on this subject talk in circles. It's very appropriate, very poetic, on the subjects that they're on their own industry, on their own utility, and seemingly not coming to any conclusions.
I don't know how to get them to understand that, and except for to show them data. But yeah, I mean, it's absolutely not a very good way to address those compensation gaps.
Mm-hmm.
Let's focus a little bit more on how do we get our company to focus more on DEIB? How does that work? If you're a people leader, if you're someone within the company that really wants to guide change,
yes.
We have a lot of experience here. How do you make that happen?
I worked with one engineering leader who...
I love the long silence. How do you do that? Yeah, how?
Joined sort of midstream in my tenure at a company.
Mm-hmm.
And he was white male, but he was just so into doing the right thing around DEIB.
I mean, he had the deficit of being a white male, but boy, his intentions were pure. You know, that kind of made up for the fact that he was a white male.
That he led it from his standpoint. And we talked in another session about who has the sort of power in an org to make to make change. And
Uh-huh.
it's not the HR team, frankly. Unfortunately, they're not the ones. They can provide some guidance and a roadway and a roadmap, but in a tech company, the engineering leader is usually the most powerful person outside the CEO.
Uh-huh.
And this person was so committed to it and just was able to drive things. So
yeah, he used his white privilege, right? His male privilege.
I think it takes a leader to do it.
Oh, a leader.
And I think if you don't have leaders that are behind it, it's very hard for anyone else to make a difference.
Oh, okay. So his merit, his initiative, really made the difference. Why did you bring up he's a white male? What did that have to do with anything? I mean, I can guess. Why'd you bring it up as though it was something that he had to overcome?
Yeah, I think if you can identify someone who can be an ally in the organization, who has that passion, it's a multi.
No. Okay, so he was a leader. This guy comes in, he takes the initiative to push this thing forward and use his position, et cetera, et cetera. But now he's an ally. You just demoted him. He went from a leader to an ally. Okay.
Strong approach. Diversity. You have to get the diverse candidates in the top of the funnel. You have to get them in there so they're having the conversation, so they're on the interview slates.
You have to get the diverse candidates into the funnel. Okay, again, all he's saying is he's discriminating people for employment on the basis of their aesthetic. That's all he's saying. He's putting it in very couch terms, trying to soften it a bit. That's what he just said. Okay.
So that you actually can make offers to these individuals. And then the equity, inclusion, belonging, kind of to what you talked about, that is all after that.
Yeah.
Individuals like
it's almost like the actual sin/crime is taking place at the front of the entire process, and everything after that is a complete and absolute buffer. It's an add-on. It means nothing after you've already committed the original sin.
That are allies that are passionate about it, or diverse themselves that are going to be very passionate about it. Invest time. If you're in a recruiting leadership role like us, or HR leadership role, invest time with those people and try and get the other leaders in the organization, usually the CEO, to give them what they need. And it comes down to writing a check. I mean, it really comes down to writing a check because there's an investment. There's going to be people investment. There's going to be training investment. There's going to be all sorts of things that they have to do.
Yeah, just make sure you make that check out to me.
But it also is support. Like if you can get the CEO to verbalize that support, to talk about in the organization, to support this leader that's doing this, and then show the success of that team, not just on the number of people on the team that are diverse, but how they're doing. And if you look at really high performing teams, they don't all look at every single problem the same way. The great thing about diversity is your backgrounds, all of our backgrounds make us think about things differently.
Do backgrounds equate to skin colors? Do backgrounds equate to gender? Do you know that you can put a room full of people who look exactly the same? Heck, tell you what, take a room full of octuplets. All right? Take a room full of octuplets. Eight people, all looking exactly the same, born of the same mother, raised in the same household. Are you going to have absolute conformity of thought, opinion, perspective? No. Diversity of thought is not what you guys are promoting.
And when you think about things differently and you're on the same team and you look at a problem, you got every perspective there to try and solve the problem. And generally you come to a better solution on that problem. And so
generally, what is generally? If it's not all the time, how much investment do I want to make in generally?
If you can find an individual like that, see the long-term benefits of that team's performance based off of the fact they've got a very diverse team that's working on these problems and creating great outcomes. And then the leader of the organization is then vocalizing it and sharing it and supporting them and propping them up. Those people that are maybe a little resistant to it will, at least for self-preservation, realize that they need to think about it because their teams need to be able to perform at the same level as this other individual.
Right. So correlation equals causation. If I make a quote unquote diverse team and that team performs well, then obviously the only factor that led to that success is the group aesthetic. So let's just keep replicating that on the basis of group aesthetic. In fact, if that group is made up of X percentage of this kind of person and X percentage of that kind of person, let's just make sure that all of our teams have the exact same demographic mix as the successful team. You know, each team will have a racial or gender quota, right? So when we're considering who to hire for a particular team, we have to decide, will they fit in this team? Oh, wait. Am I describing a discriminatory process that is both immoral and illegal in this country? Oh, I am. I'm
a big advocate for getting executive teams to think very holistically about their roles. In our organization, we talk about inclusive leadership is leadership. The model of leadership that we've been working with for so many years, it's not holistic enough. We're asking different things of our leaders now.
Is it authentic enough? Holistic enough? Does it make enough impact? Any other buzzwords you want to throw out there? You want to tell us what you're talking about?
For a head of people, for example, to be the one who's pushing the DEIB train, that I think requires a lot of patience and really strong influencing skills. I will add to that with diversity, there's so many benefits, right? McKinsey showed studies where, innovation, decision-making, revenue can improve dramatically with great representation in your organization.
Correlation equals causation. Someone's skin color, someone's genitals, someone's ethnicity equals better outcomes. Their thinking is better, their innovation is better, on and on and on. Okay, keep going.
What those studies don't address is what happens in between, and that's conflict. Right? We get great perspectives. All these different perspectives coming in means we have different opinions.
Yes.
Different opinions means you will have conflict.
Yes.
Making it healthy conflict. And for a people leader to focus their energies on teaching and embedding skills on how to really engage in healthy conflict that's resolved. So not conflict that sort of hangs out forever, but raising and resolving conflict. That is the key.
Yes, focusing people's attention and dealing with conflict resolution. Yeah, those are elements of, or at least some, of a good leader. What does that have to do with someone's skin color? What does that have to do with someone's genitals? That's just leadership 101.
And so to the extent that a people leader can really help
a people leader. What is that? Who else would you be leading? I mean, is there a dog leader? Is there an antelope leader? What?
Functional leads understand the benefit of DEIB, right? You've got the studies, the data are out there.
Yeah, and it's somehow you guys are the first on the chopping block when it comes to a budget revision. Why is that?
I would also suggest not necessarily approaching this from a social justice perspective.
Oh,
right. I think often I'm hearing a turnoff for leaders is that HR is coming and it's bleeding heart, and that it's not that people are uncaring. I don't mean to say that at all, but there is a business benefit to diversity.
Prove it. And if you can prove it, why are you guys on the chopping block when budgetary concerns come up?
There is a business benefit to having inclusion and belonging alive in your organization.
Prove it. Give me an example. You've had decades of experience. Give me an example where it obviously, without any other factors, was the driving force into an improvement in bottom line and outcomes. Prove it. That race or gender alone in the mix led to a better outcome for a company. Prove it.
But the key to harnessing that is really an ability to navigate conflict. And that's where I think
that's life. Navigating conflict is life. Life throws an obstacle or a hardship at you, and you find a way to work through it. Ideally. Right? You could give up. You could submit. Some people don't have a choice in the matter. It's a conflict. It's an obstacle you can't overcome, but you try to make the best out of it. That is life, let alone having to do with leadership. but leadership of your own life. What are you talking about?
The people functions, we get impatient, right? We want everybody to, why can't you just understand? People understand. But if Michael has to hire 50 salespeople or he can't get the product out the door, what's the trade-off he's going to have to make with those 50 hires that he needs to make in a month?
What?
Right? Who's going to take some of the pressure off to make sure that he's still going to hit his targets? He's still going to get everybody into the onboarding class at the right time.
What?
While also casting a wider net, knowing that it's going to take time.
Obviously, they have to hire you, right? Is that where this is going? What are you talking about?
So saying that DEIB matters is one thing, but getting into the challenges that a leader is dealing with on a day-to-day basis, that's where things really start to, the rubber hits the road, right? That's
what I honestly have absolutely no idea what she is talking about, where she is going. What does this have to do with anything? The ability to lead, to supervise, to manage, it is an art. It is a skill. It is something you build up over time. Some people are much more naturally inclined to it than others, just on the basis of, I don't know, their personality or their luck or their charisma. Who knows? Right? What does that have to do with what you're talking about? Organizing 50 salespeople. Okay. What does diversity, equity, belonging, and inclusion have to do with that? What?
That's where we really can have impact as people leaders.
What is a people leader? Am I people leader? Is that what you are? Is that your title? Did I miss that? Is that what they consider themselves to be, that they're people leaders? That DEIB advocates and executives are people leaders as opposed to cheese leaders or something?
You brought up something interesting, and this is going to be a tough question. Probably maybe should have prompted this before we even met, but it just came through now.
Yeah.
A lot of times we're all preaching about the advantages of this. We've all seen it.
Well, you're preaching the advantages of it because it's in your business, in your interest to do so. It's your business. It's your vocation.
But a lot of time no one's talking about it.
What?
So please humor me. Can you talk about a company you've worked with or a client where you've implemented a program that not only hired people, but you got the belonging and inclusion correct, and the result that came with it?
Okay. Give me a second. He's asking for an example. Oh my God. He's asking for an example.
What the fuck are you talking about?
What the fuck is this? What the fuck is this? Right?
Okay, it has nothing to do with TEDx. That's my shock. That is my shock. He asked an on-point, relevant question. He challenged them at a table to give an example. Oh my God. Thank you, Keeverdam. People leader, new buzz phrase. Hey, if we were doing the bingo card, that'd be on there. People leader. That is just such a weird thing to say. I distinguish myself as a people leader as opposed to that general in our veterans ERG. He's a soldier leader. Thank you, Keeverdam. Okay, guys, this is it. Boy, I'm glad I waited. All right, here it comes. Feet to the fire. He wants you to justify your existence. All right. I'm so happy. Because whatever comes after this will really show, quote unquote, where the rubber meets the road. In all of their decades of experience, can each of these three individuals provide a relevant, actionable, active example of what they do and the benefit it provides? And if they do, is it a story that we will believe? Let's find out.
And I think this is really good for founders who, like you said, HR or someone else is pushing it on them. They don't understand the power of it. Let's talk to them about the power of it.
Yes.
The work I do is we don't really do a lot of the equity, inclusion, and belonging after hire. We're all about helping companies hire. They don't really lean on us for post hire.
Okay, so all you're there for is to help them filter out candidates on the basis of their quote unquote diversity metric or score or something, right? Okay.
That's why I bring in Natasha and others that know how to help them with that. But I can think of a client. I think some of you guys know Greg Russell. He was at SnapDocs. We were there helping them hire a bunch of engineers. And we actually got, early on, they talked about the fact that they wanted to have a diverse slate of candidates.
Okay, so they talked about wanting to have a diverse slate of candidates, so people who looked different from one another.
On the engineering side. And this is at the heart of hypergrowth in San Francisco a couple of years ago, and it's super difficult. Greg was really, really pushing for it. And when we first got in there, there was conversation, but there was not the investment necessary, because we talked about, look, and Greg knew this, but I think other people in the organization hadn't quite wrapped their head around the fact you're going to have to look all of the metrics and the KPIs that we build out around recruiting. You're going to have less candidates coming through each week. You're going to have less interviews coming through each week. You're going to have to think about the way you assess these individuals. If you're looking at a senior software engineer and minimum threshold is 8 years, maybe you need to drop that down to 5 years for these individuals because they just haven't been in the industry as long. Can you think about some of these other skills they're bringing to the table besides just that they can help with being able to be effective, being a good hire on the engineering side? So lower your standards and start filling in the spaces with unnecessary or irrelevant metrics or irrelevant skills? I mean, maybe that's just my cynicism talking, but that sounds like what I just heard. And so about 2-3 months in, we actually basically created a specific team, and all they did was go after top of funnel for diverse candidates. Top of funnel. Top of funnel. So the least sorted part. Okay. And the goal was to try and get, I think it was a third of the candidates that got to interview stage be diverse. All right. So just remember, guys, this person that he is named now, I don't know who Greg Russell is. I don't know the company, SnapDocs. Okay. So this company put up a racial and or gender quota for their recruitment process. I just want you to remember this. And we were very successful at getting them to that point. And it was the project overall, they wanted to hire 80 engineers. We thought it would take about 8 months. And they wanted to have a decent amount that were going to be, I can't remember the exact number, but I think it was right around 20% ended up being diverse. Okay, so a 20% quote unquote diverse candidate pool or ultimate hiring pool. They wanted at least 20% of who they hired to be diverse. All right. And I've said this before, and I will probably say it till the end of time. At whatever point in your recruitment or hiring process you put up the racial filter or the gender filter or the orientation filter or the ethnicity filter or the religious filter, whatever it is, guess what? You've just violated federal law. To this moment, I do not understand how any of this is done and not prosecuted immediately. But okay, so Greg Russell at SnapDocs, I think that's what he said the name of the company was. Okay, so they wanted a 1/3 diverse, so 33% of the candidates had to be quote unquote diverse, and then ultimately 20% of who they hired had to be diverse. Okay? We got that whole project done in 6 months. So got it done quicker, which saved the company money because they pay us by the month. Yeah, when you're only assessing people on the lowest common denominator and not worrying so much about merit, it really is a fast process. So they paid less amount of money to us to get the job done, and they were able to hire diverse candidates because of it. And so, wow. If you have that focus, and if you have if organizations can recognize the need to do that, it can have a good outcome on the hiring side. And that's the only part of the process that I touch currently. I'm no longer running HR. So, yeah, I successfully helped a company be discriminatory
in their employment practices. I successfully helped them but probably violate several federal laws and civil rights. Yeah, it's great. I got a paycheck for it. Woo.
That's an example I can think of.
Okay.
Nice.
I moved from one company to another once, and it was pretty clear right away that the new company just seemed more diverse, both in the conversations I had with people and in just representation as well.
Representation.
And there was someone within the HR team who she was a culture carrier for that company. She'd been like employee number 7 or something, and there was like 1,000 or something like that by that point. And she said that they'd worked for a long time on the inclusion piece first. Before they never had any like diversity hiring goals or programs, but they worked on the inclusion. And because of that, it just became a magnet of everyone feeling comfortable with who they were.
Okay, so if you take away all of the discriminatory stuff and just work on people feeling included, right, in the company, a social thing, a cultural thing, where it's like, hey, welcome to the company, you're part of the team, da-da-da-da-da. Great, fine. Some of these words taken in a vacuum are not inherently insidious about anything about it. No, it's fine. You want to feel like you belong to a place? Great. You feel like you're included in the conversations and the work that you do? Great. I mean, I experienced that. When I got to my company, I was the most junior of juniors in everything. But slowly but surely, sort of like a stowaway on a pirate ship, I started learning little things about this part of the business and little things about that part of the business. And then one day I was given this big project, right? Like it was one of those situations where the stars aligned and I was the only one around who had the time to do this thing. And so I just dove into it, even though it was completely outside my wheelhouse, even though I'd never done anything like it before. But I gave it my best shot, and I got some advice from the people around me, and I worked and I worked and I worked, and I created this thing. I can't tell you what it is. It's just a very technical thing, but it was this technical thing that I did not have any education for ahead of time or anything else, but I just got advice from the people around me. I looked at examples elsewhere, and I made this thing. And then I put it in front of the people who knew what they were doing. And I said, I think I got it. Does this work? And they looked at it and said, wow, that's great. And it became part of the product. I was like lowest on the totem pole effectively. And I was given something above my punching weight, so to speak. And I didn't do it in a vacuum. I asked for help. I asked for advice. I looked up a couple of things, but the bulk of everything was on my shoulders, and I did it. And oh my gosh, and suddenly, and it was like I was given a task. I was given a challenge. I met that challenge, and it ended up actually helping the company. I saw the benefits of my own labor reflected in the company's product. I can't tell you how great that felt, right? That kind of opportunity doesn't come along all the time for a lot of people. I was very lucky, and I look back on that as a mark of, wow, I can do that. I felt like I belonged then. I wasn't just some guy doing this entry-level stuff over here. I actually contributed to the benefits and the fortunes of the company. It was amazing. What did any of that have to do with what I look like? Nothing. It was because I was the only guy there.
And I was pretty impressed with that. And it was pretty clear from as soon as I joined that it was different.
Ultimately, what was the business results? As Matt said, They saved time. They were working on building things faster.
Yes.
Gosh, in startup world, so critical. What do you see was the business result that really helped them by having that focus on inclusion?
Okay. Credit to our moderator for keeping on the task of the question. For everything else that's been gobbledygook so far, credit to him for really honing in on the point.
This was a consumer company, so one thing that was super clear is we looked a lot more like our customers.
That is what we looked a lot more like our customers. Okay, well, you achieved the lowest common denominator. Great. The window dressing was more acceptable to people. Oh, great. That's great. Are you kidding me right now?
Oh, nice.
And so we're sense for our customers.
What? What does that have? You can't name the company? You can't name, can you at least name the product? Or at least tell us what the product is, even if you don't give a brand name. Like, how does that mean anything? What does the look of the workforce have to do with the quality or efficacy of the product?
And that I could only imagine. I mean, it's a very hard thing to measure, but I can only imagine that was super useful. And
it's a very hard thing to measure. You can only imagine. So you don't know. Okay.
Relating to business results.
Driving revenue. Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes sense of you don't know what you're talking about and you have no information, you can't justify it. I kind of feel bad for this guy. His opening of, I'm a recruiter and I'll always be a recruiter, I've accepted that. It sounds like a very sad man. It just feels like it. I don't know.
Sense.
It doesn't make any sense. He just says he imagined. You can't be measured. He talked about the look. Okay, as much credit as I give our moderator for keeping him to the question, his answer doesn't answer it.
What about you, Natasha?
Coming in from the inclusion and belonging side.
Which is nothing compared to the importance and the honestly sinister nature of the diversity side or even the equity side. Because belonging and inclusion, that's just HR, that's just people skills. It's got nothing to do with the core issue here.
The teams that we've seen that have implemented this focus on how to navigate conflict, how to align as a team, what's the common purpose, figuring out how they're going to work together, their team agreements, investing in that upfront has shortened product to market time by half, which is pretty remarkable. Again, consumer products.
What does someone's skin color have to do with that? What does someone's gender have to do with that? I mean, focus of skill, quality, and team mission. Nothing about that has anything to do with what someone looks like.
But that shift of, we know we're going to hit roadblocks and we know we're going to hit obstacles along the way, but we know how to navigate it.
So why aren't you guys efficiency experts? What does any of this have to do with the look of the individual? If you're just trying to help companies have more efficient teams, more efficient workflow, why don't you go into that business? I assume that's where you're going to have to go after this all falls apart. After this all falls apart and you can't push discrimination anymore as part of your services package, you're just going to have to go back to being an efficiency expert.
That's where the real emphasis was. Now, they had brought together a very diverse team, a globally diverse team. So we had multiple nationalities, different genders. There are multiple dimensions of diversity.
All two genders?
Represented in this group. But it was that focus that people tried to then replicate. They wanted to replicate. They would point to that team and say, hey, that works really differently. It looks different. They act different. Everything's different about that team. And it's not because of the optics. It's not just the visual. It's different. There's some.
That is your entire business. That is the first word in your job description, the look. If it's not about the look, if it's about the result, why do you care about the look?
Something else in the way these folks work together that is different. And so other teams started to ask for that as well. I think it's really the harnessing the capabilities that people bring and looking ahead and figuring out how we're going to go through conflict. Learning that has been key.
So it's about merit and teamwork. It's not about the look. It's not about the aesthetic. It's about merit, skill, and teamwork. Wow. What a revelation.
Ultimately, the big focus from our perspective is it's not just about awareness. It's not just about training. A workshop is not going to make everything better. It really is about making sure that there are systems and processes in place to prop up the way people think and the intention people have when it comes to diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. Because we want things that are going to outlast us.
You just described the very basics of how to get something done. You put the people in the group that know what they're doing, you put in a good leader to manage them, and you make sure the skills and abilities are being focused in the right places to get the job done. You just described effective organization, leadership, and teamwork. That's it. It's got nothing to do with DEIB. You are describing your irrelevancy.
Right? So if I win the lottery and I'm off to some exotic locale next and I drop everything at work, I want the organization to still have the core tenets of DEIB embedded.
What? Why?
In a way that's not dependent on me as an individual. And so this is the one thing I will say as a people leader when I was in-house, I often would just introduce elements of diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging into the company and never say anything about it.
I just kind of dropped it in there. I was all stealthy about why? Why would you be stealthy about it? You never brought it up. Why not? Why wouldn't you want to show the utility and the success of these things? You're just weaving them in without telling anybody? What?
Never said anything about it.
Why not?
And it was deliberate, often because the leaders didn't want to hear it in an explicit way.
Okay, so the people in charge of the company didn't think that what you had to offer was useful, and so you just kind of defied them and put it in there anyway. Are you going to tell us now that you know that what you did led to better outcomes than if you hadn't?
And so it's the long game in terms of influencing and getting people on board. But in the meantime, in parallel, I am sitting there and I'm introducing competencies for selection and for assessment, so that there's a little bit more objectivity brought into some of our core processes of hiring and performance.
Okay, well, you haven't given us a concrete example where you came into a company and you did X, Y, Z, and that led to this result. You just buried us in nonsense and abstract anecdotes of nothing. So you'd actually the quality of answers have gone down with each successive speaker. The first guy had a very specific example. The next guy gave kind of a very generalized, kind of wavy, hazy kind of answer. And now she's just piled on the word salad for hers.
That I'm looking at our handbook. Well, who needs to know about the handbook? Maybe your GC and maybe other parts of the organization. But are they really paying attention to the fact that I've put in gender inclusive language?
Did anybody notice that I slipped in some they, their pronouns into this handbook?
I usually would tell them afterwards.
By the way, did you know I did this thing? After, when you told me not to, I did this thing I wasn't asked to do?
These things last even after I'm gone.
Oh, wow. You gender inclusive language. Like what? Like what did you do? What did you change? The handbook said X, I changed it to Y. And what effect did that have? How often do people read the handbook? At least not until after, like when their orientation, and then when after that. Like you just said, the general counsel might have read it. Okay. And
that's what I'd love to see from our people leaders and even our executive teams. They start to think about what's the legacy that I want to leave behind and what's necessary to.
But what the legacy you want to leave behind is stealthily editing the company handbook for gender pronouns. Wow, what boy, major impact there. That'll echo through the ages.
To make that come to life.
Interesting.
Like, what company did you do this to? What company did you just stealthily edit their handbook and feel good about yourself? Give yourself a big pat on the back. Look what I did, everybody.
So you just organically did it?
Organically? No, she intentionally edited the handbook. It wasn't organic. She made the decision of her own volition. She wasn't given any instruction to do something, and she defied the people that were paying her and put stuff in that wasn't asked for. That's not organic. That's just spring from the ether or something. What are you talking about?
I think that's a really good tip. I've never heard anyone say that before.
Yeah, taking the initiative to implement a personal philosophy into the company handbook without being asked or instructed to. Yeah, that's great. Yeah, let's do more of that. What?
Organically bringing it in, not forcing it.
Not forcing it. She did it without instruction. She did it without telling anybody. She forced it. It wasn't organic, dude. What are you talking about?
There. And then maybe for business leaders understanding you might have a diverse team that's successful, you can look at the business result right in front of you. You just maybe didn't.
Where is it?
There. So
I'll tell you one thing that won't work. One thing that absolutely will not work is approaching DEIB from a place of blame and shame.
You don't have enough X type of people in your company. I'm here to tell you that you need to do this or else it looks bad. If your concern is the aesthetic, if you're talking about representation, if you're talking about underrepresented minorities, if you're talking about the voices who don't get enough, how else do you push this other than blackmail? Emotional, psychological blackmail. If you don't do this, you're going to look bad. Not blame and shame. Well, what do you call a disparity between two racial demographics in pay? What exactly is that information supposed to give to the company you're working for? It's blame and shame. We see some problems there. Why is it a problem? Huh?
Yeah. Right? We may feel a bit of an adrenaline rush, and we may feel good when we've sort of put people in their place when it comes to diversity and how they're talking or what.
That's everything that you've been talking about. You just changed the language of a handbook to be more gender inclusive or whatever. You passed judgment and implemented your own beliefs into this company's handbook because you're language policing them. What are you talking about?
How open are you when somebody puts you in your place? How willing are you to look at different perspectives when someone's told you you're wrong?
Oh, I don't know. I mean, if someone tells me I'm wrong, but I know that I'm not, should I accept that criticism? If it's an argument that has several different perspectives and angles on it, should I just say, oh, I'm going to be quiet now because I was wrong. This person told me I was wrong. To correct this person or to argue, obviously that'd be a bad thing. Are we talking about white fragility now? Are we talking about white fragility? Are we talking about being made to be uncomfortable conversations, courageous conversations, Glenn Singleton?
I'm not saying there aren't moments where we shouldn't have those conversations. We should. Those conversations can be really important. They can be very eye-opening.
Look, God, this guy looks so sad
for people. But leading with that will absolutely shut down any openness. And so it's a one thing, a do not do, don't lead with blame and shame.
Yeah, don't lead with blame and shame. Just, honey attracts more flies than vinegar, right? Okay. We'll take the blame and shame to come in afterwards. We'll hold off on that for a little bit.
Can't agree more. Yeah. Well, I think that is all the time we have today. So Unfiltered, stay classy. We'll see you next time.
All right, thank you.
Awesome. Thank you.
I mean, I appreciate the fact that this was unfiltered. I appreciate the fact that they gave them all the space and time necessary to say what they had to say and describe what they had to describe and really show us the truth behind this entire endeavor. The hypocrisy, the lack of specificity, the couched language, decades of experience around that table in this industry, in this aspect of business, quote unquote. And that's the best they got. That's the best. It really does feel like a castle built on sand, doesn't it? It really does. A couple of hard questions. And he asked one, and I'm glad he did. He asked for a solid example. Give me an example of a company you worked for and the result. One guy named the company and gave specifics. And I credit to him for doing so. He answered the question, right? He got them the result they wanted, right? The company said, we want this percentage of recruits to be quote unquote diverse. And we want ultimately the number of people we hire to have this percentage of diverse individuals. And he got them that result. Now, what was the ultimate benefit in the bottom line to that company? Not his problem. That's not the job he was tasked with. So he gave an answer. He gave a full answer, even if he was, again, couching his language. So kudos on the first guy. Second guy said nothing except that he imagines, he hopes, he believes that what he did had some effect, the end, on a product that's not named in a company that's never said. Okay. And last lady went all over the place in talking about how if you hire her and she sees something she doesn't like, she's going to stealth change your business practices, your handbooks, God knows what else. How many other things has she done that she was never asked to do that companies just don't realize? All right. That's going to come back and bite them sometime when some lawyer from some other company or some civil rights attorney comes in and says, hey, wait a second, what is this in your handbook that was published 6 months before my client was hired or 6 months before my client was rejected or fired or something? And they're like, since when has that been there? Anyway, a couple of comments from you guys, and I'm going to wrap this up. I went way longer than I imagined. That's my own fault. Arc210, these guys have years of experience with this shit, but they act like they've heard this stuff for the first time. Like, yeah, leadership, teamwork, like that's some kind of revelation. Like, seriously. Like, oh my gosh, can you imagine the good teamwork with people who know what they're doing lead to good results? Let's see. Scrappy, I'm glad I ignored part of my handbooks. I mean, you know, when I first got a job at a big company, I went through orientation. I read the handbook. I had to check off a bunch of things. I had to know what this, that, and the other was. You know, there's a utility for it just to make sure you're aware. It's not like we didn't tell you what the rules were. There you go. That's all. It's CYA, legal CYA for the most part. But everybody has to do it, you know, one time or another in life. Ryan R., eye-opening is a microaggression against the blind. When will these bigots stop? Yes. That's eye-opening. I mean, you can open up your eyes and have no eyeballs, right? I mean, technically, you're... Anyway. Let's see. Tim the Ancient, I think I'll slip in a good old repentant belief in your Lord Jesus Christ in my next work document and see how that goes. Yeah, you know. And they won't notice. I'll just change this here and there. It'll be fine. Lexi Mads, is this the equivalent to when a dude takes off a condom during sex without his partner knowing? Yeah, she was stealthing in some pronoun positivity. Yeah. Let's see. Anybody else, guys? I'm sorry to cut this a little bit short. Well, not short in the sense of the broadcast, but in the comments and things. Yeah, I think I'm going to do that. I got sooner or later, Sister Scribe is going to show up and we're hanging out today, so I got to get myself ready for that. Everybody, for those of you that lasted this long, thank you so much for enduring this with me. It was very interesting. I found it very interesting because, again, I love listening to people who comport themselves as professionals, experienced individuals in these fields, and where they have absolutely no excuse for not giving us the full meal deal on what they do, what they have to say, what they have to think, and seeing exactly what comes out of that. Some people, they let it all loose, like that first guy on the last question. He just dumped it out there. Here's the name of the boss that I was working for. Here's the company I was working for. This is what he asked for. This is what I provided. Good. I'm glad. That was great. I'm going to have to look that up. I'll have to see if they've had some, you know, any stories about that in the meantime, how their profits and fortunes have been in the meantime. But yeah, again, decades of experience. You should have the 30-second sales pitch for what you do and its efficacy down pat. I mean, if this is a service you provide, if this is something you're selling to companies as your professional vocation, there should be nothing stopping you in an introduction of saying, I've done this, 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 and this, and what I do leads to better outcomes because of this. It should be very simple. It should just roll off the tongue. And yet all we get, just words, ideas, maybes, couched language, ifs, ands, abstracts. Again and again, it tells you something. And I really do think, I could be wrong, but I really do think that if affirmative action is struck down in the next 6 months or so, you're going to see a marked change in the whole DEI apparatus. I think that whole machine is going to have a big problem if the Supreme Court rules the justification for affirmative action is inherently unconstitutional. And then you have all these guys out there promoting DEI as a solution to a company's problems. And it turns out those same arguments are functionally illegal, as they really always have been since the Civil Rights Act was passed. But anyway, everybody, thank you so much for joining me. If you'd like to hear more from me, after 2 hours and 15 minutes, I can't imagine you would. But if you would, you can find me here next Thursday at 6 p.m. Pacific, 9 p.m. Eastern for another episode of TED Excellence, where I'll take a look at another off-brand TED Talk for fun and profit. I call it Foffit. Sure. But either way, if there's a content creator out there that you like, whether it's me or somebody else, please do like and share their content when you have the opportunity to. You guys are our best algorithm, far better than YouTube will ever be. Everyone, thank you so much for joining me. Moderators, thank you for keeping an eye on things. Even though everyone here is so well behaved, you have very, very little to do. Everybody who donated either to myself or to the GoFundMe's pinned to the top of the chat box, thank you guys so much for your generosity. I really do appreciate it. Everybody, have a good rest of your Sunday. Have a good rest of your weekend. Hope you are all safe and well. If you are not well, please get well soon, and I will see you on the next one. Take care. Bye-bye.